May the words of my mouth and the meditation of all of our hearts be pleasing to you, O Lord, the one who gives us strength and the one who does redeem us. Amen. This is a wonderful day that I welcome new friends into the life of St. Andrew's, and welcome a friend I am getting to know. Glad that all of you are here on this wonderful morning. I've been thinking about these friends who are making their way back, and I've been thinking about sacraments. You know, we Episcopalians use that word quite a bit. Catholics do. I think Lutherans do. I'm not quite so sure. But that big fancy church word called sacraments, and today one of the chief sacraments, that being baptism. And as I've been thinking about sacraments lately, I think back to Kelly and Kyle, friends of mine. But to be more correct, more precise, I really think about their two daughters. I have to give their two daughters credit for how I am really focusing my thoughts about baptism in the Eucharist. Margaret is the oldest. Margaret was 5 when I first met her. I was her day school chaplain and her parish priest, which meant that on most weeks I would see her 6 days a week. And so as I got to know Margaret, I got to know Kelly and Kyle and became good friends with them. Now, of course, we had Eucharist 3 times a week that Margaret would have seen, so she was accustomed to seeing people come up to the rail. And so Margaret began asking her parents, "Can't I too receive communion?" And so Kelly is like a lot of parents. She had a very good question. She came to me one day and said, I really don't want Margaret to receive communion until she understands what's going on. It's a fair question, right? We all maybe have had that question. Until I know what happens here at this rail and at this altar, I should not partake of communion. Now, I knew Kelly well enough. I asked, well, Kelly, you know what it's called when you have all of this figured out? No, and she leaned in for the answer. It's called last rites. And I said to her, even then, you may not fully understand everything that takes place at this altar, this communion rail, or at baptism. There is some mystery to all of what we do here, the mystery of communion, the mystery of baptism. One of the real mysteries may be why Jesus bothered at all with offering himself. That could be a good place to start in that mystery. Even with our well-meaning and good questions, sometimes I think that we believe that we have to cognitively understand this mystery. And if we cognitively, intellectually, emotionally, spiritually can't understand it, then we really should not participate in it. By the way, I will tell you that sometime after my conversation with Kelly, Margaret began receiving communion, and that's not because of anything a priest said to a mother. That instead is because of the persistence and questions of a 5-year-old who would look around and see her fellow church members receiving communion, and she wanted to be part of that life. This morning, we take note of another child, young Sebastian, who is with us this morning for a very specific reason, a very specific sacrament, to be baptized. And of course, Sebastian is an infant, which then raises questions about the other sacrament of baptism. Our more Protestant brothers and sisters might ask us why we baptize infants. Because in their mind, like the Eucharist, you hear that you have to fully know what's going on here this morning. And an infant doesn't fully understand what we're about to do. So shouldn't you wait till someone's older? They're in the age of reason, that they've made a pronouncement, a public pronouncement of faith. Isn't that the time you should baptize? It's a good question. Perhaps you've asked that question. Let me, by way of answering this question, share with you my experience. Now, some of you have heard me share this, and so if you have, tune out for a couple of minutes and rejoin me later in the sermon. At the age of 9, at the end of Vacation Bible School, I stood in front of my church and said, I want Jesus to be my Lord, and I promise, I take a vow to spend the rest of my life trying to make Jesus the Lord of my life. So I was baptized shortly after that public pronouncement that I allegedly knew everything that was happening and going on. 36 years later, I can share with you my memory of baptism. Now, in my church, we were not baptized in a beautiful shell. Our baptistry was about the size of the balcony. It was a small pool. These are the 3 distinct memories of that day I was baptized. As I was walking up one set of stairs to the changing room, I looked to my left and I looked into the minister's changing room. And I noticed a large pair of waders. And I thought, well, that's what you use to go fishing. Why? And then it dawned on me that this minister was going to be baptizing, if I remember that day, 20 people, and he was going to spend a lot of time in the pool, so he needed waders. That was my first distinct memory. The second memory is a gentleman in front of me forgot the instructions given to him before the baptism, those all-important instructions. Instruction number 1, don't forget to put your feet in the cinder block at the bottom of the pool. He did, and he floated. And so I watched, we all in the church watched for a minute or so as the minister wrestled this man into the cinder blocks to go on with the service. The third distinct memory, as I walked down the other set of stairs to rejoin the service, I heard hair dryers for all the young girls and women who had to dry their hair before returning to the service. Jesus was baptized. He came out of the water and he heard a voice. I heard hair dryers. I'm not quite entirely sold on that theory that one has to cognitively, intellectually, spiritually, emotionally understand everything that's happening to you on the occasion it is happening to you. And so all this leads me to Kelly and Kyle's second child, a child they adopted just a couple of years ago, Abigail. They adopted Abigail through Catholic Charities. And in talking to Kelly and Kyle, I could see not only in their eyes, but I could hear in the conversation that they knew fully well that Abigail came to them as a gift, like any child. A child cannot decide when they're born, nor can a child decide to whom they're born to. And so they come into this world as a gift. Now, to be sure, Kelly and Kyle did a lot of work. They completed a lot of paperwork. They went through a number of interviews. They had a number of people, including myself, serve as a character witness for them. They did a lot. But make no mistake, they knew from the very beginning that this child came to them completely as a gift. That's sort of what it means to be adopted. Paul, the Apostle Paul, that one we all talk about in the church, he talks about adoption no less than 6 different times in some of his different books. He describes our relationship with God as one in which we are adopted. He describes our relationship in such terms that we are adopted, that God comes after us and to us and for us long before we began to cognitively, intellectually, emotionally, spiritually make a decision. In other words, it's not about what we figure out. It's not about our achievement. It's not about our contribution to this thing. It's that God comes first, after us, for us, and to us. We are adopted. Think about that for a moment. All of you who are baptized, all of you who come to this communion rail to receive communion, you are adopted. Paul knew the Roman law of adoption quite well. It's an ancient law in which our laws are largely fashioned upon. And in the Roman world, if you were adopted, you stood to receive all the legal inheritance. Once you joined another family, in a sense, your old life was behind. It was old. And you entered a new life. You entered a new family. And you had all the privileges, rights, responsibilities, which we'll talk about in a minute. You were welcome to all of that. That's what it meant to be adopted. You're treated like a new person. All the old is washed away and gone. In adoption, Abigail became a new person. In baptism, Sebastian joins a new family. He too is adopted, and he too becomes new. Neither his parents, godparents, grandparents, nor Sebastian, none of them know what fully lies ahead in his life. We don't cognitively, intellectually, spiritually know all that lies ahead of us. Is it okay to baptize infants? Of course it is. Of course it is. Because it doesn't matter what we intellectually, cognitively, spiritually, emotionally understand. It's instead what God does first for us, to us. Is it okay to baptize infants? You bet it is, for we are adopted. Amen.